SBC Media.
Welcome to iGaming Daily, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe. Supported by SBC Summit Barcelona, the industry-leading conference bringing you the future of sports betting and iGaming.
SBC Summit Barcelona is where you can experience the entire global industry coverage under one roof. Join 10,000 industry professionals for 3 days of game-changing conversation and education. Get your tickets now at sbcevents.com.
Good afternoon and welcome to the iGaming Daily, and I'm your host, Joe Streeter, the news editor of Payment Expert and Insider Sport. And me being your host, that means one thing. We're going to talk a little bit of football. And it's an exciting week for football as well. The Women's World Cup gets underway from the other side of the globe in Australia. It's a fascinating tournament and it's a fascinating time for the women's game. And we've got a great panel for today's podcast to discuss it further. Starting with our very own SBC native, Lucía. Lucía, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm really excited. Thank you.
Great stuff. Excited for the podcast and for the World Cup, I hope. And to not SBC natives, but to very familiar faces to the SBC audience. Firstly, Christina, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
It's no problem at all. It's great to have you on board. It's great to have your insight. I know you've been doing a lot of research into the women's game, and somebody that also sees another side of the women's game, the commercial side of the game that's grown exponentially in recent years. Dean Akinjobi. Dean, how are you, my friend?
Yeah, very good. Very well, thank you. Looking forward to the podcast, Women's World Cup. It's, right here upon us. And very excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, it is right upon us. It's on the horizon. We've got some great games, some great stars to be part of the show. And there have, though, been some criticisms today. I think let's kick it off, actually. That's a great point to kick it off. How excited are you guys for the Women's World Cup? Has it captured the imagination of the wider football audience? Lou, if you want to start with that one.
Yeah, I'm very excited, although I'm not looking forward to waking up at 3 a.m. for some games or 1 a.m., although I don't think I'm going to sleep before those. Last time it was a 4-hour difference for me at the beginning, and then I traveled to France for some matches, so it was very, very easy. Not this time, though, but I'm very excited. The women's football is growing a lot in the past few years, especially after the 2019 tournament. So I'm excited to see what's going to happen this time.
And Christina, I know you've invested a lot of time and research into this tournament, and it's going to be a special tournament for yourself and for what you do. Chris, how excited are you for this World Cup?
Oh, massively. As some of you know, my background is sports betting. So I kind of started off as a trader. So football is something I'm into. Cricket's something I'm into. And I think as Lucía said, women's sport has been growing exponentially over the last few years. And women's soccer in particular has really started to capture the imagination. And when you look at some of the world's biggest teams right now, most popular teams, most successful teams, they are some of the biggest kind of sporting nations. So I think we're in for a really, really interesting World Cup. In some respects, I think it's going to be better than the Men's World Cup because we've got teams in the women's game who are actually better than the men's equivalent back home.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's something we'll get onto further. And Dean, obviously, you've seen from the inside of the game just how much it's grown, how much it's become a commercial powerhouse. How excited are you to see this World Cup capture the imagination of fans?
Yeah, really exciting. It's, really exciting times for the women's game as a whole. It's been exponentially growing, since the last World Cup. And even, from a personal point of view here at Football Media, we've been, supporting women's football from, prior to 2019. We've just seen the growth curve happen both on the commercial side and also just the growth of the game as a whole. I mean, if you just look at stats such as I think even last month, you had 850,000 tickets that had already been sold for the Women's World Cup. So it's phenomenal numbers already. And then Ireland's opening game against Australia had to be moved from a 45,000 seater stadium to, I think it's 85,200 seater stadium. Compare that to England versus Germany in the Women's Euros, which had 87,000 people for an opening game. Yeah, it's going to be, really, really exciting times, and brands involved are, going to obviously benefit from the from the upside and the fan engagement as well.
Yeah, it's staggering to see that growth. I mean, it now seems almost normal to be getting those numbers at women's football, but 10, 15 years ago, that is something that was relatively unheard of. It really speaks to the growth of the game. It speaks to the players involved as well that have grown it, because without them, it wouldn't have been possible without their sort of star power. Really briefly, Dean, you mentioned it there, how you've, football media, you've supported the game. If you could just give us a little oversight into some of the deals you've done and what you've learned from them about the power of women's football.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like I said, we've been, as you know, supporting women's football for a significant period of time. I mean, if you just go back, is looking at 2019, we bought a brand deal, one of our clients, Zeo Skin Health, to sponsor the West Ham women's team. At that time, they weren't, women's football was like almost like a novice thing. And we got them to sign a 3.5-year deal with the West Ham women's team. And that resulted in last year us renewing the deal for another 3 years. So in total, the deal's like, it's total like 6.5 years, one of the longest running sponsorships in the WSL. What we've learned over the time is that we've done multiple deals in between, even around the World Cup. Recently, we've got a few brand ambassador deals with Matilda's players and a few England players as well. But what we've just learned is that the fact that we were very, very early adopters in this space, and we were always bringing brands in to see the growth scale of what the women's game could be. And essentially, brands that have we worked with and we're currently working with, helping them with the activations. And Zeo has just benefited, I don't know how many fold. It's unbelievable being involved in women's football for such an early stage. So it's only going in one direction essentially, and we're happy to be at the forefront of it. And we just find that we've gone full circle, whereas brands that was previously apprehensive about the growth of the women's game are now kind of like all over us as a business. So we have a dedicated women's football division here as well.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's really cool to see how that's grown as well. And Christina, I wanted to ask you about, there's a few news rumblings. I mean, the news in the build up to this tournament hasn't all been positive. There's been disruption over broadcasters and FIFA sort of playing hardball. But I wanted to ask you about a story today where there were a few complaints about prize money, and the prize money differences. I think it came from the Australia team, and the prize money differences is we've seen progress in terms of having that level playing field between the women's game and the men's game sort of equaled. What are the next steps with that, and how important is it that the prize money is brought closer together at least?
Well, I think football or soccer is no different to some of the other sports. We've had a similar argument in tennis. Similarly, cricket, rugby, every sport is kind of having these conversations. I think we're in a much better place than we were, but there's a lot more work to do. And it's not just prize money. It's things like, equal facilities, equal pay, merchandising. What we've had over the last, 5 years or so is kind of national football associations actually kind of coming out and saying we're going to pay the women's soccer teams the same as the men. The US won, after a 6-year battle, a landmark deal for equal pay. We've got to kind of get those things right to begin with. The prize money then goes to kind of the associations of tournament organisers. And how we get them engaged in the conversation is going to have to be very much on a kind of multifaceted approach. You touched on the kind of conversations with FIFA and rights, broadcasting rights. I mean, for me, that was just very much a non-conversation, because by not kind of engaging with various broadcasters and saying we can cut a deal, that the people who kind of came out of it looking not great was FIFA, because they could have been out there saying, well, we're doing this because we support the women's game and we think broadcasting rights should be on a par, gender neutrality, and it wasn't. The story was very much, it's an opportunity to make money and the game is growing in popularity, so we want to make more money out of it. So I think absolutely, you're right. We do need to kind of continue to have the conversation, but we need to engage a much wider audience. So, people like Dean, who are cutting out marketing deals, more often than not, it's sponsorship and marketing that can actually be the driver for the change at a kind of principal or egalitarian level.
Yeah, and Lou, I wondered if you wanted to follow up on that one.
Yeah, I think the time to level the playing field was decades ago. It's the same sport. The women train the same, if not harder, than the men to make it to the World Cup, considering that most professional players need another source of income to make a living. And speaking about the U.S. women's national team, some players said in the past that everyone is lucky that they're only asking to level the playing field and they're not asking for more, especially in the U.S., because we all know the difference between the quality of the women's team and the men's team is like very different. The cash pool is $110 million, while the men's was $440 million. That's 4 times less than what the Argentinian players got in 2022. And yeah, of course, I agree. FIFA is responsible for this. If you need the money, like they always said, we need more sponsors and stuff. Lower the cash pool for the men's. That's it. To 20, right? That's the easiest decision. It's not like the men's need this money. You need the money to grow women's football. It's very easy. I think they complicate it.
Yeah, Joe, I'd like to add on that point as well, is that I think the fact is, you just compare the US women's team to US men's team, and success, speaks for itself. I mean, we're in the results business. If you just look at how down to performances and success, they're more successful than the men's team. So they should naturally be, have a level playing field or even more, which is, I think the more is actually more relevant in the US team's case. With regards to overall level playing field for the women that are earning in women's football, I think the product and the market will dictate that as well. And because as women's football continues to grow, especially on an international scale, I think that there is definitely that justification to have that level playing field as the men, because you're dealing with just the football association. I've heard some people talk about on the club level, but we're not quite there on the club level. Just if you compare like Premier League to like a WSL. But from an international side of things, I definitely think that when you're dealing governing bodies, we could definitely be on a level playing field, because again, you have to look at what is women's football doing. I think that women's football is the most amazing sport, but then it stands for more than just a sport. It stands for like inspiring the next generation, equality and diversity, and maybe young girls wanting to be the next Megan Rapinoe, the next Leah Williamson or something like that. And if they see that they're actually not, from an international scope, not actually being paid the same as men, then, I think the whole message behind women's football is kind of depleted, because it's about showing about levels of equality and diversity and progression, really. So, that's my kind of view on where we are kind of going with the, with leveling up the playing field with regards to prize money and stuff like that.
I completely agree with what Dean said. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of responsibility on women about this. Like, I wish it would be as simple as saying like women deserve the same as men because they're doing the same job, and not putting all these things like they're inspiring, because they are, obviously they are. Again, I agree, but I think the conversation should be simpler than that, because it's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, and it's you raise an interesting point about sort of the two conversations, the one of international prize pool money and international money, and then also domestic money, if you like. And because the disparity with domestic money is so significant, the need to level up the international money is emphasized even more to bring the two worlds closer together, and because, like you say, the men's game simply doesn't need that money like the women's game does to continue to inspire generations and to continue to bring new talent through and to continue to increase the exposure of the game.
And Joe, just one point as well. Most people are not fully aware of this, but a lot of, for example, in England and international teams, the prize money, like the money that the men's players get, a lot of these players actually donate it to charities, because obviously they don't need it. But it's not something that they actively talk about. But a lot of it is actually just donated to some of their charitable foundations as well.
That's really interesting, and an incredible gesture, but also underlines that the money isn't significant for them in terms of their income and their assets. So it underlines more that the two worlds should be brought closer together, I guess. And you both mentioned Megan Rapinoe as well. I wanted to sort of touch on her star power. She was obviously a pioneer for the women's game, but her leaving the women's game now and retiring opens the door to new stars. And as we approach a World Cup, we've seen it time and time again. It provides a platform for new stars. How important is it that, you know, somebody's going to step up and take that mantle, and we're going to get the birth of some real new icons of women's football from this World Cup?
Yeah, I think every World Cup brings an opportunity. Megan Rapinoe's has been a great advocate for the game, both on and off the pitch. Some people, she's Marmite to some people, but at the end of the day, she's used the platform of women's football to get certain causes across. And I think the fact is, there's going to be, you look at the Australian team at the moment, led by Sam Kerr and multiple other players within the team. They're very vocal about equal pay and stuff like that. And I think that this is their time to use their platform to get across other messages that are going to actually support the growth of the game, whether that's political or non-political. But ultimately, I think the Australian team, look out, because they're not going to be very quiet, so to speak. And I think I think we saw today, I think Millie Bright came out and said they won't be discussing anything in the England team about equal pay and stuff like that and levelling up the playing field, but whereas that's the complete opposite from the Australian team. So I think look out for a few players in the Australian team that are going to become kind of like household names that both on and off the pitch, really.
Yeah, and Christina, who are you? Are there any players that sort of stand out to you? And if not, how important is the World Cup as a platform to create new stars?
I think it's a huge platform. We talk about Megan Rapinoe, and to me, she's almost like the Billie Jean King of
Wow.
women's soccer. She's kind of been a pioneer. She's got things moving, got statements. But now we're starting to see a new generation of pioneers coming through. I think Sam Kerr, I know there will be debates between Sam Kerr and Alexia Putellas, but I think Sam Kerr is probably the best, well, in my view, the best female soccer player at the moment.
I'm Team Alexia.
We can have a bet.
Yeah.
Take it offline. But it's not just the kind of people on the kind of game. It's how these individuals are actually presented as role models. That's where the engagement starts to come in. For so long, we've had male soccer stars become stars, not just because of what they do on the pitch, but, quite often because of what they're doing off the pitch. And I'm going to use Sam Kerr as an example here. When FIFA, EA Sports launch a game and they have Mbappe and Kerr on the cover, that starts to really kind of send out a different message. So it's not just star players, it's personalities and what these individuals actually represent. And I think we're going to see some stars emerging from teams which really haven't been on the radar. This time round, we've got Italy in the World Cup. We've got Ireland in the World Cup. We've got Jamaica representing the Caribbean. We've also got Morocco out there. And one of the parts of the world where women's soccer is growing faster than anywhere else is the Middle East. China is another place. So I think we're going to start to see almost like an international lineup of potential role models. And if you kind of want to see where the vibe is potentially going, if you have a look at Coca-Cola's campaign, I think that's what we're going to start seeing on this World Cup. Not just football skills, but personalities who actually represent things that a whole multi-generational fan base can tap into.
We saw off the back of the Euros, the England win at the Euros, that a whole plethora of stars were born and characters were sort of born and became stars off the back of that tournament victory. And this summer I was engaged in the transfer of Alessia Russo, whether she would stay at Man United or go to Arsenal. And it's great to see them narratives taking place. Lou, how important do you think it is that from all parts of the world as well, we see different stars of world football being born and elevating their character at the World Cup?
Well, I mean, there's no bigger platform for than the World Cup for football, right? So this is huge. And just to answer this question and to continue with the previous one, I'm looking forward to seeing Hegerberg's second World Cup with Norway after quitting her national team as a protest for not getting the right conditions in place. And also, this will be Stefania Vanini's last World Cup with Argentina, because she said that she's very tired of fighting to get equal opportunities and not getting them. So I hope that this World Cup actually showcases these kind of players, and not just the ones who are, I don't know, are friends with Taylor Swift or are beefing with Donald Trump, like players who actually make a lot of difference in their own respective countries. Because, for example, if we keep talking about what Vanini has done for Argentina, then we're going to increase the exposure of the Argentinian league, I believe, even though she doesn't play there and she plays in Spain. But the same will happen with, I don't know, Hegerberg in Lyon in France. The French team has been having a lot of issues, and it would be great if these kind of players became stars after they're already stars, but you know what I mean, after this edition of the World Cup, and see if, as a result, the local leagues could grow as well.
Yeah, that is important, right? That is very important that the off the back of the World Cup, the domestic leagues get more fans. I wanted to give you an opportunity there, Lou, to talk about the Norwegian player Berg, to just tell her story a little bit. It's quite a fascinating one.
Yeah, because she didn't play in the 2019 World Cup, and she had been named best player in the world in 2018. And you may remember a video of her accepting the award and the presenter asking if she could twerk. That was the player that I mentioned. That was a great example of how women are treated when it comes to sports and being professional athletes. But after the 2019 World Cup, a few years later, she decided to come back to the national team. And actually, I think she scored a hat-trick when she first played again. And it would be amazing to see her on the international stage once again in a World Cup, leading her country, and see how far they can make it. It's an extraordinary story because to quit your national team, it takes a lot. I'm guessing that for an athlete, representing your country is the best thing that you could ever do. So shout out to her for doing that, because it got a lot of attention at the time.
Yeah, it's commendable for sure, and it'll be good to see her back in action. Obviously, the stars being born, obviously, it requires exposure. It requires them to be seen, of course. And Christina, you mentioned before, we spoke before about the broadcasting roller coaster, I guess you would say, especially here in the UK and across Europe, where we weren't sure where the tournament was going to be broadcast. A little bit of a UK-centric question, but we are getting the tournament on BBC and ITV. How important is that? And how important is it that the tournament and women's football as a whole continues to secure these mainstream broadcasting deals?
Oh, yeah, 100%. And you can see the power of being able to watch the games live and engage in that excitement on something as simple as when you watched the England-Germany final, player took a shirt off, was wearing a Nike sports bra, and searches for Nike sports bras shot through the roof. Yeah, again, 1,000%. And that's for something which lasted a few seconds. So, yeah, when you look at the fact that in other sports, just having it broadcast, making it accessible to people for whom it might not otherwise be accessible, just generates so much more interest. And it's, this I think is going to be the biggest women's sporting event this century, if not history of women's sport. I don't think we've ever seen anything like this before, where you have women representing every continent coming together under a common purpose, and at a time when the game is more popular than ever before. So I think the more people it can go out to, I think what would have happened had a deal not been struck is there would have been a huge amount of illegal streaming. And the reason I say that is year on year, FIFA's own figures show that the audience numbers have doubled. So if it was just over 1 billion last year, the last World Cup, we've had a period of time since then where the sport has just seen an astronomical increase in popularity. So I think to not show it would have been, I just don't think not showing it would have been an option for FIFA or for any of the national leagues or the broadcasters.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree to an extent. And I would also say that the demographic for women's football is a little bit different to the demographic for men's football. And it feels like more of a family event. It feels like something that the whole family will sit down and watch. You're bringing new audiences to the sport of football. And perhaps, dare I say, it is an audience that is less likely to find a streaming site and to go on and, to find streaming sites and that type of stuff. So I think it's really crucial that they're on mainstream TV, and it is easy to be a family event. And Dean, from the commercial side of the game, how important is it for you to be, obviously this is the international game, but I guess there is a trickle-down effect that benefits you quite significantly when you're making deals in the women's game. How important is it that it's on mainstream TV and it gets that wide exposure?
Oh, yeah, 100%. It has to be on mainstream TV. We're talking about the Women's World Cup, and it's kind of crazy that it was actually questioned that it wouldn't be on mainstream TV. Just look at the WSL, growth of WSL, broadcast consumption is up nearly 300%. And if you look at that, we're talking WSL's broadcast on the BBC, it's broadcast on Sky. So naturally, from our point of view, we'll obviously be able to help to grow the women's game by actually bringing more sponsors in and tell them about how far and wide their eyeballs will be, their brand will be reaching. And then if you look at the World Cup as a whole, consumption is up, in comparison to previous World Cups. There's 1 billion people watched it. We're going to see, significant numbers for this World Cup. So the importance is it can't be placed any higher than because the growth of the women's game is reliant on exposure. So I think that from a domestic point of view, how can we have women's football from WSL being broadcast on the BBC and Sky, and then not having the World Cup on free to air or something like that on ITV? So it's all about sponsors are interested in numbers, sponsors are interested in engagement, but then also what we found is that our message to sponsors is that yes, you can get all this great stuff from numbers, reach, engagement, but when you're actually involved in women's football, you're actually part of something bigger than the sport itself. Your brand is actually engaged with a movement that is actually a broader part of what's happening in society. So I think once we brought brands into women's football, they understand that, as well as all of the reach and engagement in comparison to the men's game, they realize they're actually part of something. We've got brands that have been involved in women's football since 2019. And there's others that have recently come on board as well. And they've just seen the engagement and the brand recognition and the conversations they're going to be involved with have really taken their brand to the next level and putting them in places that, they never thought they would have been able to, engage in. So, broadcast consumption and awareness is absolutely key. It's only going one way. So it would be detrimental. I don't think it was ever going to happen. It was never not a question because, it's World Cup, it's Women's World Cup.
Definitely. And just as we round up, we're running out of time. We could talk for 90 minutes plus extra time on this subject. But Christina, I wanted to provide you a little opportunity to just give an oversight on some of the research you've done ahead of this World Cup and how people can check it out. Yeah,
sure. So in partnership with the International Betting Integrity Association, Stats Perform, Entain, Flutter, and the German Sports University, what we've started to do is a little bit of research into the correlation between women's sport, betting, and integrity issues. You can go to the International Betting Integrity Association website. I think SBC also have the link to the report, which you guys can distribute. It's called Breaking Barriers. And it's really very much the tip of the iceberg, but it won't come as any surprise, I'm sure, to anybody to know that when you see an exponential rise in popularity in the sport, The bookies invariably will follow, especially when you can kind of start to see that transition to mainstream media and broadcasting. And we have seen that. We've seen an increase in the number of female sports bettors, anywhere between 20 to 50%, based on where the operators are around the world. We've seen an increase in some of the betting markets, but also there is no difference in terms of betting revenue between male bettors and female bettors. And that, of course, where you have betting, you always have that risk of match fixing and betting integrity. So we've started to see that correlation. We're looking at doing a case study based specifically on the Women's World Cup. So if you have any operators or anybody within the kind of betting and gaming ecosystem who would like to be part of it, they should reach out and they're very welcome to join us. But the bottom line of the conclusions are women's sport is on the rise. It's here to stay. And there is that very, very strong correlation between betting, integrity, and we need to act now. We've seen what it's done in the men's game. We now have an opportunity to actually take a proactive approach with women's sport and the women's game.
Yeah, definitely is really important research and is well worth checking out. Essential to check out, actually. And to round us off really quickly, one word answers. Who's winning the World Cup? Lou, start us off. One word only.
Jesus. No, I won't do it. I won't say it. No, I can't.
Dean, who are you picking? Who's winning the World Cup?
Australia,
the host nation. Christina, who are you backing?
I'm actually going to go with Dean. I fancy the Aussies as well.
I don't think Australia is going to win. I can tell you that.
Oh,
I can tell you who, but I can tell you who won.
I'll take the patriotic punt, and I'll take the Lionesses then after a great Euros. And thanks ever so much for your insight today, guys. Really excited for the World Cup. Really excited to follow up with you as well, Christina, on the research. Everyone enjoy the football, and it's coming home, I heard as well. So thanks ever so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of iGaming Daily, brought to you in conjunction with SBC Summit Barcelona, being held at the Fira Barcelona Montjuic on the 19th to the 21st of September. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News Network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.